It's almost midnight as you slowly walk up the stairs to your apartment. Each step feels increasingly harder to take. Your shoulders and back are aching, and the pain is slowly creeping to the back of your head. You fumble around in your pockets for the keys to unlock the door. Finally home. I'm tired. You search for the light switch in the darkness while kicking off your shoes. After throwing in some aspirin, you wonder why it's so quiet. Your spouse has a night shift today, and you're silently staring into the emptiness of the scarcely lit room. You check the fridge for food. Guess it's instant noodles again. After you gobbled up the small cup, you can still feel a void in your stomach. You remember that you have the early shift at your second job tomorrow morning. You set your alarm, and before you realize it, you close your eyes and fall asleep from exhaustion. I'm sure most of you can relate to this at least somewhat. Coming home from work or studying and being so exhausted that you just want to fall into your bed and get a good night's sleep to recover some of your energy so you have at least the minimum of strength required to get back on the hamster wheel the next day. We all can relate to that feeling. We also know how it sucks to not be able to get enough rest because the never-ending list of chores and other obligations we have to take care of is always at the back of our minds. Life can be a ruthless struggle, and stress from work eats away at the remnants of our sanity every day. Now imagine all these burdens weighing you down while having the gnawing, uneasy feeling at the back of your mind that your bank account is already overdrawn and your next measly paycheck is still 1.5 weeks away. Utter despair. Welcome to the sad reality for millions of people. Part 1. Numbers and hard facts. As I've shown you in my last video, the number of working poor in the United States is in the millions. Depending on which source you use, it is somewhere between 6.3 and 12.4 million, though it is safe to assume that the latter is closer to reality as the first number comes from a source who has an interest in sugarcoating the truth. The numbers for other Western countries don't look much better. Past studies on the working poor in Europe reveal that depending on the country, the part of the working population that is at risk of poverty and social exclusion varied between 4 and 19% in 2012, with roughly 8% counting to the working poor. Since that, the number has only increased to about 10% today. But back to the US. You might remember this table from last time. Let's look at the typical family of 4 again. If their household income is under $31,200 a year, they count as poor. These numbers are fairly low. If you think you can raise children and live a decent life in an American city by earning slightly above this number, you are dead wrong. Sure, it varies from state to state, but even in economically less active areas of the country, that amount is a joke. You see, the problems with numbers like these is that they don't account for what it actually means to live off this amount of money. What it means for your health and access to healthcare, your children's education, and your family's quality of life. Instead, the numbers suggest that you're just fine if you earn slightly more. Sure, if you say so, Mr. Government. But this is obviously not the case, as your living conditions don't just take a huge jump if you earn, let's say, $32,000 or $33,000. It's a spectrum. And to truly be on the safe side, meaning having a good quality of life for your whole family, eating healthily, getting healthcare, going on holidays, having access to mobility, etc., while also, and this is important, building modest wealth by getting your own property and being able to save money for emergencies and retirement, your family needs to earn substantially more, probably at least $50,000 or better yet, well above. What's quite sad for the US is that different ethnic groups are disproportionately affected by poverty. In this graph, you can see that people of ethnic minorities are well overrepresented when it comes to being a member of the working poor. There's a reason for equality and social programs, and people who attack and want to abolish them can fuck right off, in my humble opinion. The reasons for working and being poor are numerous. Let me highlight the most common ones. Not enough work. Certain types of jobs simply don't require a person to work full-time or were designed to be part-time so that employers can skimp on the benefits. There is a reason why many people have to work more than one job to get by. Low wage. This is the most obvious one. In order to cut the production cost of goods and services, it is in the best interest for employers to keep wages as low as possible. This is roughly how it works. Let's take a Big Mac for example. The price of a Big Mac varies from state to state. In that price, the following is included: the cost of the raw materials, like the patty, buns, etc., cost for business maintenance, running and upkeep, the cost of labor, and of course taxes. What's left is the profit the company makes. What's in the best interest of the company is, of course, to make as much profit as possible. There are a limited amount of possibilities to do so. Buy the raw materials cheaply, minimize taxes, keep the operational costs as cheap as possible, and, of course, pay the lowest wage possible to your workers. And this leads us to the main problem. Big corporations like McD's are publicly traded and thus are incentivized to maximize profits. There's a stark contrast between the profits and growth of some companies and the precarious employment they offer. Everyone's most beloved fast food chain has roughly 150,000 employees. It's also famous for laughable wages for their restaurant staff. The term flipping burgers and all the spiteful glee associated with it exist for a reason. Yeah, very classy. On the other end, we have a few dozen executives in the corporation who are responsible for how the business is run, which includes how high wages are. The company made a profit of $14.563 billion in 2023. Sounds awesome, right? So, are the 150,000 employees getting a raise now? Is their dull and hard work, their performance, and putting up with weird customers every day rewarded? Well, slightly. But it's still not a living wage. Profits go to the owners and shareholders of the company and to the executives, who made sure they are as high as possible. Have you seen this before? Do you have an idea why it looks like that after what I've just explained to you? Of course you do. You're a smart cookie. This graph depicts the growing wealth gap between the poor and the rich, and now you know why it's growing. It's because owners and investors insist on growth for their portfolios, and guess who has to make that happen? What's also quite alarming is that the middle class, once the broad cornerstone of society, is shrinking and converging with the wealth and income of the poor. The decline is real. Part 2. Impact on the lives of working people. Life looks bleak when you're working hand to mouth. Think about it. No movies, no eating out, no vacation, especially not abroad, no fancy clothes or new cars, no Netflix or other paid services, no nice house or apartment, no school trips for the kids, and the list goes on. Most importantly though, no hope that it will ever get better for the rest of your life. This oppressive feeling chains these people. The fear of losing what little they have paralyzes them. It's a daily thought routine and it prevents them from breaking out of that hell. The rights and freedom they supposedly have only exist on paper. If you're only a few bad weeks or days away from landing on the street, you will sure as hell not quit the shitty job you have, because it's the last straw that keeps you over water. Why don't they just move or get a better job then, you might ask? Genius! Brilliant! Why haven't they thought about that? Yeah, there are reasons why they work those shitty jobs. Missed or denied educational opportunities, family roots and responsibilities, age, etc. Try moving away and getting a better job without the right qualifications. Try getting the right qualifications without money and time. You see the problem? They are stuck. And the low-paying jobs that supposedly keep them afloat are actually handcuffs that prevent them from ever moving up in the world. Their time and freedom are stolen because they can't afford to say no and walk away. The lack of financial resources also has huge repercussions for their physical health. Not eating enough or only cheap food for extended periods is going to do a number on your body. Not getting healthy food with enough nutritional value and a lack of proper health care ensures that poor people on average die about 10 years earlier than wealthier people, as studies in the past decades have shown. What would you do if you had an additional decade of lifetime to spend? As I showed you in part 1, the wealth and income gaps between the rich and the poor are increasing every year. This means that the bottom tier of the middle class is in severe danger of slipping into poverty. This fear is a reality for millions of families who live just slightly above the poverty line. Even families who earn considerably more fear falling through the ranks and ending up much poorer. Rising inflation, while at the same time wages are stagnant or not adequately and continuously adjusted, increases these fears and will ultimately make them a reality. Dreading the descent into poverty leads to many middle-class workers adjusting their behavior towards work. They keep their head down and do as they're told, because losing the job or being passed over for that sweet promotion or pay raise is something they will avoid at all cost. This, of course, bites them in the butt, because it means they have less bargaining power and therefore are ultimately at the mercy of their employers. The psychological consequences of being poor or fearing poverty are severe. The most obvious ones are stress and burnout. Think about it. If you're constantly working hard at a job that's not fulfilling, but you can't quit or slack off because you fear losing your livelihood, the constant strain will take its toll sooner or later. This is extremely dangerous because being overworked and stressed will inevitably lead to the exact thing that you are trying to avoid, and that's stressing you out. It can become a vicious cycle very quickly. That's also the reason why anxiety disorders are disproportionately high among the working poor compared to other societal groups. Inevitably, all this pressure and fear will lead to chronic depressions. The number of people suffering from this illness is almost 5 times higher among people living under the poverty line compared to people who earn substantially more. And I probably don't have to mention what this can lead to if it persists too long and worsens. All these factors combined can and often will have downstream effects. The most common ones are unhealthy relationships with partners and within families or friend groups. Constantly being on edge and lacking a positive outlook on the future can lead to short tempers, pessimism, and nihilistic thinking. It's all worthless anyway. Nothing's going to change. Life sucks. I can't deal with your issues on top of mine. And thus, the negative experiences caused by their external circumstances get passed on to the people closest to them. Unfortunately, this will backfire because those people are usually the only supporting pillar they have left in their lives. Don't get me wrong, I'm not judging anyone here or trying to berate these people. Quite the contrary. What I'm saying is that if we want to avoid failing families in a society where more and more people have broken social relationships and increasingly suffer from feelings of loneliness and abandonment, we might want to take the issue of poverty more seriously. Because after people have lost everything, starting with a positive outlook on life, their chance at least moderate wealth, their families and support groups, it can become a downhill slide for them, quickly ending in substance abuse, homelessness, or worse. Part 3. Society. Why should you care? Well, because it's obviously something decent humans would do. But okay, let's not be judgy here and look at why it matters in a broader sense. Whether we like it or not, we do not inhabit the earth and our countries alone. Even the most selfish and egotistical will admit that they are dependent on a functioning society around them. Strong societies have always extended a hand to the less fortunate in a show of solidarity, because letting people at the bottom rot is going to do more harm than good. Let me explain why. A well-functioning nation depends on many things. The economy is, of course, one part of that. In our system, the economy heavily depends on people who not only work and keep it running, but who can also participate by purchasing goods and services. The less people can do so, the more the economy will suffer. Think back to Henry Ford, not a very respectable human being with his views on Nazis and so on, but he at least got one thing right, and I quote, "The owner, the employees, and the buying public are all one and the same, and unless an industry can so manage itself as to keep wages high and prices low, it destroys itself. For otherwise, it limits the number of its customers. One's own employees ought to be one's own best customers." Which basically means if you get too greedy and don't pay your workers enough so they can actually buy the stuff you produce, you'll end up with nothing. And if every part of the economy, each company, tried to do that, the economy of the nation as a whole is going to suffer. Do you think that a society where the top 10 to 20% live in well-maintained and fairy tale-like gated communities that have to be protected by armed guards, while the rest of the population toils and suffers in filthy ghettos, and the majority of the nation decays around them, will prosper? Seriously, this is a nightmare scenario straight out of dystopian fantasies. And if that's still not enough for you, let me give you some examples of what happens when a majority of the population suffers because of political errors, stalling national economies, or a minority class of short-sighted wealthy people. Yes, this is the final outcome if poverty and desperation reach the boiling point. You end up with political turmoil, violent revolutions, and in the worst cases, demagogues and radical parties taking over the country and f***ing things up for everyone. Part 4. Solutions. Solving and eliminating poverty has always been a struggle throughout history. Many big and small solutions have been devised and tried. But if it were that easy, I wouldn't have to make this video now, would I? Let's give it a shot anyway. People with certain ideological backgrounds see the responsibility solely with the poor themselves. These solutions range anywhere from getting a better education, stop doing drugs, get better jobs, don't have as many children, and so on. As you can see from some of these examples, it is quite clear where they are coming from. A personal disdain and even contempt for poor people, and a lack of understanding of the real reasons for poverty. And while it is true that everyone has to put in some effort to get somewhere in life, systemic issues pose a huge barrier to many people to get out of poverty. Solely shifting the blame to the victim shows a lack of basic humanitarian will and ignorance. So while I think that things like better and more equal education are very important, you can't just tell people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. In order for personal effort to be fruitful, the ground has to be provided. And this is where the next two possible solutions come in. The main difference in the lives of most poor people compared to the more affluent is their childhood background. Who do you think is more likely to succeed in life? A child who is raised in a family with two working and well-earning parents, that lives in a clean neighborhood with no crime, good schools, and an active community, or a child raised by struggling parents in a poor district with high crime rates and underfunded schools? It's obvious, isn't it? We choose to ignore these basic facts way too often, because it doesn't affect us. But we ignore this at our own peril. We simply can't afford to waste the potential of large parts of society. The state has a duty and obligation to enable every child to get the best education possible. At this point, I want to give you a quick heads up that I'll be releasing a video about the education system in the near future. It's gonna be a longer one, so buckle up. Giving educational help to underprivileged kids is a good thing, and I'm all for it. There's just one problem, and it stems from a misunderstanding of the actual reasons for poverty. It honestly boggles my mind every time I hear someone claim that giving better education to everyone is going to solve poverty. Increasing the quality and accessibility of education, as commendable as that is, will not. Here's why. In mathematics, it is sometimes helpful to look at extreme cases to see how functions will behave. This thinking can also be applied here. Let's assume we gave everyone the best education possible. Everyone gets access to the best learning materials, best teachers and tutors, they get individual aid, food at schools, social workers, psychologists, educational programs designed by the best pedagogical experts, basically whatever it takes to get them as educated as possible. What would the outcome be? You will have an extremely high number of well-educated kids that qualify for college or university and will try to get degrees in fields that offer well-paying jobs. Sounds awesome, right? Until you realize that those jobs are the minority of jobs available on the market. Not every member of an age cohort can be a doctor, engineer, IT specialist, or work on Wall Street. The reality is that there are millions of crucial jobs that we depend on to make the system run. And guess what? A large number of them will not make you wealthy. They still have to be done, otherwise society wouldn't function. So basically what you end up with is a bunch of PhDs driving Ubers or working for McDonald's. So in the future, whenever someone tells you that better education will fix poverty, you know that they haven't thought it through. This argument, in essence, is actually another bootstraps argument in disguise, because it basically means that if everyone has the same chances at a good job, then everything is fair and we don't need to do anything else. What people that claim this fail to recognize is that the problem isn't that not enough people qualify for well-paying jobs, but rather that the number of jobs that are well-paying are limited and that the number of jobs where workers get paid badly is way too high. The answer is a living minimum wage, not enticing everyone to fight over the few high-paying jobs, because that will ultimately bring wages in those sectors down as well. And if your business can't pay a living wage to its employees, then it's either a bad business and deserves to go under, or the owners and shareholders are skimming too much off the top. Each individual worker alone is not in a powerful enough position to change something about that. Collective bargaining is a potent tool. Unions have been maligned in many countries over the past decades. Those smear campaigns were more often than not financed and orchestrated by employer-friendly organizations and think tanks, as well as political parties who align more with the laissez-faire style of capitalism. But when it comes down to it, what are companies going to do? Fire everyone and shut down? They need the workers more than they are willing to admit. Banding together to make sure they get a piece of the pie is the best way to get what they deserve. Another possible solution that has been suggested more and more in the past years is the idea of a general basic income. What it boils down to is that all members of a society get a certain amount of money every month that will cover their basic bills, food, and so on. Everything they earn from work is a bonus.
Awesome!
There are a lot of angles from which people discuss this highly controversial idea, and so many intricacies that I think it's worth it to discuss this in another video. So let's just leave it at that for now. An even farther away solution could be a systemic change that rethinks the way we work, how we value our work and our time, and how the economy functions. This is so far out there though that I think it is also best left at this. Maybe I'll talk about it in the future. In the end, I would like to address everyone that is viewing this who is part of the middle class and thinks that they are safe and far away from poverty. News about breakthroughs in the research of artificial intelligence are happening more and more frequently. The advancements seem to be so big that many renowned economists and researchers are already talking about the next industrial revolution, driven by automation through AI-powered systems. Don't laugh, I was skeptical at first too, until I heard about the breakthroughs of AI in the solving of protein structures. I know how hard it is and how much work and effort it takes to do so with classical research, through purification, crystallization, and X-ray crystallography. The fact that AI is already 1,000,000 times faster than researchers and extremely accurate today makes me wonder what it will be able to do in the future. And if it can make jobs for high-level scientists redundant, what is going to happen to the millions of okay-paying routine-based positions? Do you really think that you are not in danger of facing financially hard times because your run-of-the-mill office job is safe? This was a bit darker and more serious than I intended to. Apologies for that, but I think it's a very important topic. I hope that you were still able to take something away from it. I want to kindly ask you to subscribe so that you won't miss any future episode. Thanks again and see you next week.